A billionaire's heart, guarded by loss and wealth, meets its match not in a boardroom, but in the gentle hands of a waitress who soothes his triplets' tears. But before he can trust her with his future, he must test her with a devastating lie. Hello, bestie. Welcome. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The air in Zuma, Lagos hummed with a specific, moneyed frequency. It was the quiet clink of fine china, the low murmur of deal-making, the soft rustle of designer silk. For Kenechukwu Kin Obi, this was usually his natural habitat, a place where a mere glance from him could summon a manager, a signed contract, a perfectly timed glass of Dom Perignon. Today, however, he was an island of pure, undiluted chaos in a sea of calm opulence. In the plush, circular booth meant for six, his world had been reduced to 3 high chairs and a cataclysm of spilled apple juice, squashed plantain, and despair. Kayamika, Baiko, no, don't put that there, he pleaded, his voice a strained whisper as his daughter enthusiastically attempted to style her hair with a handful of jollof rice. To her left, her brother, Chitty, had discovered the aerodynamic properties of a piece of puff-puff, launching it with a gleeful shriek towards an impeccably dressed woman at the next table. She flinched, offering a smile so thin it could have been a razor cut. And Chimamanda, the smallest but most determined of his triplets, was performing a Houdini-esque maneuver, her tiny body slithering down from the straps of her high chair, her destination clearly the fascinating, glittering crystal glass on the edge of the table. A year. They were only a year old. How could they coordinate their destruction so perfectly? Keen, a man who could command a boardroom of hardened investors with a raised eyebrow, felt a bead of sweat trace a path down his temple. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, a garment worth more than most cars in Lagos, was now a canvas for mashed avocado and sticky handprints. This had been a terrible, hubristic mistake. Neka, his beloved and unflappable nanny, had called an hour before their usual lunch reservation. Oga, Shed said, her voice raspy with flu. I am so sorry. My body is not answering my name. And Keen, flush with the foolish confidence of a father who had recently been praised for successfully assembling a toy xylophone, had declared, Don't worry, Neka. We will manage. Manage. The word now tasted like failure. He fumbled for a napkin, sending a spoon clattering to the marble floor. The sound seemed to amplify in the hushed room. Kayamika, startled by the noise, decided the jollof rice was no longer satisfactory and began to wail, a high-pitched, piercing siren of discontent. This set off Chitty, who joined the chorus, his puff-puff missile forgotten. Chimamanda, seeing her opportunity amidst the distraction, made a final, successful lunge for the glass. Ken's heart slammed against his ribs. He moved to intercept, his movements clumsy with panic. This was it. This was the moment his children shattered a $1,000 crystal glass in the most expensive restaurant in Nigeria. The headline wrote itself in his mind. Obi Tech billionaire's parenting fail causes 5-star disaster. A profound, familiar ache bloomed beneath the panic. Zara. His Zara. She would have known what to do. She had a preternatural calm, a way of humming a silly song that could silence any storm. Her absence in this moment was a physical void, a missing limb he kept trying to use. He was a billionaire, a king in the world of tech, but here he was just a lonely, overwhelmed, and utterly helpless father. Just as his fingers brushed against Chimamanda's overalls, a calm, melodic voice cut through the bedlam. Let me, sir. He looked up. A waitress stood there, her posture straight and unflustered. Her name tag read Amara. She didn't wait for his permission or his acknowledgement. She simply moved into the eye of the hurricane with the quiet authority of a born caregiver. In one fluid motion, she gently caught Chimamanda, tucking her safely back into the high chair with a firm, No, little one. That's not for us. She didn't scold. She redirected, placing a bright, rubber-ended spoon in the baby's hand instead. Then, she produced a warm, damp cloth from the pocket of her pristine apron. "This is for the explorer," she said softly to Chitty, wiping his sticky hands before he could paint the table any further. He stared at her, mesmerized into silence. Finally, she turned to the wailing Kayamika. She didn't shush her. Instead, she leaned in close and began to hum, low and soft. It was a simple, traditional tune, one Keen hadn't heard since his own grandmother sang it to him. Miraculously, Kayamika's wails hiccuped, then faded into soft whimpers, her tear-filled eyes fixed on Amara's serene face. In less than 60 seconds, the symphony of chaos had been gently, deftly, conducted into a peaceful silence. Keen could only stare, his breath caught in his throat. The woman was stunning, not in the way of the models and socialites who often vied for his attention. Her beauty was in her competence, in the gentle certainty of her hands, in the deep empathy in her dark eyes as they scanned the wreckage of his table and his dignity. She looked at him then, and for the first time since Head sat down, he saw a gaze that held no judgment, no sycophancy, no calculation. Just simple, genuine kindness. "Triplets," she said, a small, understanding smile touching her lips. "You are a very brave man." In that moment, the glittering restaurant, the watching patrons, the humiliating mess, it all faded away. There was only this woman, this oasis of calm, and the profound, startling realization that the hollow ache in his chest had, for the first time in over a year, been filled not with grief, but with a breathtaking, terrifying, and utterly unexpected hope. The silence of his penthouse was deafening. It was a vast, architecturally perfect space overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, filled with curated art and the hum of climate control, but it felt hollow. Keen stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the glittering skyline a testament to his empire, but his mind was miles away, replaying a single scene on a loop. A calm voice, a warm cloth, a hummed lullaby. Amara. Her name was a quiet echo in the sterile quiet. He saw her hands, capable and gentle, deftly managing the chaos his children and his own panic had created. He saw the look in her eyes, not the avaricious gleam he was accustomed to from strangers, but a genuine, unvarnished kindness. It had been a lifeline in a moment of drowning. A week later, driven by a compulsion he didn't fully understand, he found himself back at Zuma. He dressed down slightly, a simple linen shirt, no tie, hoping to appear less like a titan of industry and more like a normal father. He requested Amara's section, his heart performing a strange, nervous rhythm against his ribs. When she approached the table, a stack of menus in her arm, she didn't immediately recognize him. Then her eyes landed on the 3 high chairs being set up, and a warm smile of recognition spread across her face. "Ah, the brave man returns," she said, her voice laced with friendly amusement. "And his wonderful army." This time, the lunch was different. He was prepared. He had extra wipes, a change of clothes for each child, and a firmer grip on his own anxiety. But he still watched her, captivated. She remembered. She brought Kayamika's water without a straw because she'd seen her knock it over last time. She had the kitchen puree some mango for Chitty, having noted his preference. She engaged Chimamanda in a game of peekaboo with a napkin, eliciting a gurgling laugh that made Ken's heart clench. He learned to time his visits for the slower mid-afternoon shift. He'd order a coffee after the meal, and they'd talk in the lulls between her duties. "You handle them so well," he remarked one afternoon, as she deftly caught a cup Chimamanda had launched from her high chair. She laughed, a light, musical sound. "Practice. I am the eldest of 6. My siblings were my first babies. This," she gestured around the restaurant, "is just a professional extension." 6? Keen asked, genuinely impressed. "Yes, in Abeokuta. This," she said, indicating her uniform, "is how I help and pay for my final year at Unilag. Law. A law student." The pieces of her began to snap together, forming a picture that was even more compelling. She wasn't just kind. She was bright, ambitious, and resilient. She wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was building her own future, brick by hard-earned brick. He found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone since Zara. He spoke of the joy and terror of fatherhood, the sleepless nights, the wonder of watching three distinct personalities emerge. He carefully edited his life, presenting himself as a busy executive, a widower navigating parenthood alone. He omitted the billions, the helicopters on his roof, the global reach of his name. For the first time in years, he was just Keen, a man, not Kenechukwu Obi, a brand. She, in turn, spoke of her dreams, not of wealth or luxury, but of justice. She wanted to specialize in child advocacy law. So many voices are not heard, she said, her eyes alight with passion. So many children are treated as property, not people. I want to be a microphone for them. He watched her as she spoke, her hands moving expressively, her intelligence shining through. He wasn't just falling for her nurturing spirit. He was falling for her mind, her fire, her profound sense of purpose. These weekly lunches became his anchor, the highlight of his week. It was a refuge not just from his corporate battles, but from the isolating loneliness of his grief. He began to notice other things. The way she treated the busboys with the same respect she showed the wealthy patrons. The way her brow furrowed in concentration when she calculated a bill. The faint scent of shea butter and ambition that lingered after she walked away. One afternoon, as she was recounting a frustrating but funny incident from her moot court practice, Keen realized with a jolt that he was no longer visiting Zuma to watch her with his children. He was visiting to see her. The triplets were his passport, his excuse to be near this extraordinary woman who, in a few short weeks, had begun to quietly, completely dismantle the walls around his heart. The fear was still there, a cold whisper of past loss, but it was being steadily drowned out by a newer, more powerful feeling. A hope so vibrant it was terrifying. The drive back to Ikoyi was silent, the usual Lagos cacophony muted by the soundproofing of his Bentley. In the back seat, the triplets, exhausted from their lunch and lulled by the motion of the car, had finally succumbed to sleep. Their peaceful faces, smudged with the remnants of their meal, should have filled him with a quiet contentment. Instead, a cold, familiar unease was coiling in Ken's gut. He replayed the afternoon. Amara's laughter, the intelligent spark in her eyes as she debated a point of contract law with him. The effortless way she'd soothed Kayamika's sudden tears. Each memory was a brushstroke painting a picture of perfection. And that was the problem. It was too perfect. The penthouse welcomed him with its cathedral-like silence. He dismissed the staff for the evening, wanting to be alone with his thoughts. He moved through the vast living room, his footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. He stopped before a large, framed photograph of Zara. Her smile was wide, her eyes crinkled at the corners, her arms wrapped around him on a beach in Mauritius. A time before the devastating diagnosis, before the painful decline, before the hollow silence that followed her passing. She would have known what to do today, he whispered to her memory, the ache of physical presence in his chest. She would have seen right through it all. Through what exactly? A cynical voice, honed by years in cutthroat business negotiations, whispered back. Through the performance? The thought was a poison dart. It struck deep and spread fast. He poured himself a measure of expensive whiskey, not tasting it. He replayed every interaction with Amara. Her kindness, her interest in his life as a busy executive, her seemingly selfless devotion to his children. Was it genuine, or was it a masterfully executed strategy? He'd been surrounded by performers since his first million. The friends who suddenly needed investments. The women whose affections were directly proportional to his net worth. The partners who smiled to his face while plotting to siphon his intellectual property. He had built an empire on seeing through facades, on anticipating betrayal before it happened. And now here was Amara, a beautiful, brilliant, incredibly kind law student, working a demanding job to make ends meet. A woman who just happened to be in the right place at the right time to rescue a floundering billionaire and his children. A woman whose career aspirations, while noble, were also notoriously poorly paid. The coincidence felt convenient. He thought of her gentle hands on his children, The trust he already felt blossoming in their tiny hearts when they saw her. The vulnerability of it all made him feel physically ill. What if it was all a long game? What if her kindness was a currency she was investing, waiting for the ultimate payout? The thought of her calculated touch on his children's skin, of her feigned interest in his struggles, felt like a profound violation. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't open his heart, or his children's hearts, to another person only to have it be a lie. The grief of losing Zara was a wound he had learned to live with. The devastation of being fooled, of allowing his children to be used as pawns, would be infinitely worse. He needed certainty. The kind of certainty Zara had given him when she loved the broke, ambitious coder with nothing but a dream and a second-hand laptop. He needed to strip it all away. The money, the power, the influence. He needed to see the woman who remained when the glittering prize of Kenechukwu Obi, the billionaire, was taken off the table. The plan began to form, taking shape in the shadows of his doubt. It was drastic. It was manipulative. It was, he knew, fundamentally dishonest. A part of him recoiled at the idea of testing a woman who had shown him nothing but grace. But the larger, terrified part of him, the wounded widower, the fiercely protective father, overruled it. He would create a crisis. He would pretend his empire had crumbled. He would present himself not as a king, but as a man who had lost his kingdom. He would see if the kindness in her eyes would dim, if the warmth in her smile would cool. He would test her heart with fire, and pray to God he wouldn't be burned by the result. The guilt was already a lead weight in his stomach, but it was a price he was willing to pay for the safety of his family. The stage was set. Now he had to play his part. The following Wednesday, a storm gathered over Lagos. Mirroring the tempest, Keane was deliberately brewing within himself. He stood before his walk-in closet, a space larger than most Lagos apartments, and deliberately chose wrong. He bypassed the rack of impeccably tailored Tom Ford and Brioni suits. His fingers brushed against a suit he hadn't worn in years, a slightly dated, off-the-rack number from his early days, its cut less sharp, its fabric less luxurious. It would have to do. He rumpled it further, throwing it on the bed and sitting on it for a few minutes. He loosened his tie and didn't bother with a pocket square. He mussed his usually perfect hair. In the bathroom, he splashed water on his face, letting droplets darken the shoulders of the suit jacket. He practiced his expression in the mirror. A hollow-eyed stare, a jaw clenched not in authority but in sheer, unvarnished stress. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who was running on the last fumes of his resolve. The performance had begun. The drive to the restaurant was a silent rehearsal. He ran through his lines, refining the story of his ruin. A hostile takeover. Bad investments in a European tech firm. Leverage called in. The narrative, built on a foundation of real business risks he'd narrowly avoided in the past, felt chillingly plausible. When he arrived at Zuma, the hostess' smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw him. The usual effortless aura of power was gone, replaced by a palpable dishevelment. He managed a weak smile, his voice quieter than usual as he requested Amara's section. Getting the triplets settled was a feat of manufactured clumsiness. He fumbled with the high chair straps, nearly dropping Chitty. He spilled a packet of sugar on the table and left it there, a small monument to his distracted state. He was a man coming apart at the seams, and he made sure every frayed edge was visible. When Amara approached, her usual warm, ready smile was instantly replaced by a look of deep concern. She took in the scene. His rumpled suit, the tension in his shoulders, the unusual mess at the table. "Mr. Obi? Sir, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft, her brow furrowed. She didn't wait for the menu ritual. She simply started writing the small disasters, wiping up the sugar, helping secure Chimamanda. Keane looked up at her and let the mask of despair settle fully onto his features. He let out a heavy, shaky sigh, the sound of a man whose world has collapsed. "Amara, it's all gone," he began, his voice low and raspy, as if each word was an effort. He kept his eyes downcast, focusing on a scratch on the table. "Everything. A hostile takeover. Bad investments. I was over-leveraged. They took it all. The houses, the cars, the company. Obi Technologies is not mine anymore. He finally chanced a look at her. He was searching for it. The flicker of calculation, the subtle withdrawal, the moment her empathy would be retracted upon realizing the golden goose had been slaughtered. It never came. Instead, her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in genuine, horrified sympathy. "Oh, sir. Kidu, I'm so sorry. Truly." Her gaze was so full of compassion it was almost painful to behold. She didn't see a failed investment. She saw a man broken. He pushed further, laying it on thicker, the guilt like acid in his throat. "All I have left is them," he said, his voice cracking as he gestured to the triplets, who were watching the intense exchange with wide, curious eyes. "And a small, rented flat in Surulere. I don't know what I'm going to do." He expected platitudes. A polite, "I'm sure it will work out." What he got was far more devastating. She looked from his anguished face to the children, then back to him, her expression firming into one of fierce conviction. "But you're wrong. You haven't lost everything." She leaned forward slightly, her voice intense, willing him to believe her. "You have these 3 beautiful souls, and they have you. That is everything that matters. The rest is just things." For the rest of the meal, her care was different. It wasn't the efficient, professional service of a waitress. It was the nurturing, protective kindness of one human being for another in profound distress. She brought extra snacks for the children without being asked. She refilled his water glass constantly, as if ensuring he was hydrated was a vital mission. When the meal ended and the bill arrived on a sleek silver tray, Keen executed the final part of his plan. He patted his pockets, a look of fresh, panicked realization dawning on his face. "My wallet. I must have left it. In the panic this morning, He stammered, the performance feeling more shameful by the second. Amara didn't even blink. She picked up the bill, folded it, and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Stop it," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Don't worry about this. Not today. Lunch is on me." She said it with such finality, such unassuming generosity, that Keen felt his own carefully constructed facade threaten to shatter. She wasn't just passing a test. She was annihilating it. And as he gathered his children, his head bowed in false shame but very real self-loathing, he knew one thing for certain. His plan had worked perfectly, and he had never felt like more of a monster. The guilt was a live wire in Ken's chest, crackling and spitting with every beat of his heart. Amara's compassion, so freely given, had been a mirror held up to his own deceit, and the reflection was ugly. He had taken her genuine kindness and used it as a proving ground for his own paranoia. The urge to come clean, to fall to his knees right there in the restaurant and beg her forgiveness, was almost overwhelming. But the fearful, protective beast he had unleashed was not so easily caged. She offered to pay for lunch, it whispered. A grand gesture, but a small price. The real test is yet to come. Can she handle the grind? The daily struggle? He had to see it through. The lie had its own momentum now. He spent the next 2 days in a flurry of clandestine activity, the irony not lost on him. The billionaire was pretending to be poor, and it required a staggering amount of logistical effort and wealth to do so convincingly. He summoned his most discreet personal assistant, Tund. "I need a property," he said, his voice low. "Not ours. Something modest, in a decent middle-class area. Surulere, perhaps. Fully furnished, but neutrally. Nothing that speaks of." Tund, a man paid extraordinarily well not to show surprise, merely nodded. "For how long, sir?" "Indefinitely," Keen replied, the word tasting like ash. Within hours, Tund had secured a 3-bedroom apartment in a quiet, well-kept building in Surulere. It was clean, safe, and utterly anonymous. Keen then sent a team to strip his actual penthouse of any personal photographs, awards, or obvious luxuries, moving them into storage. He replaced his art collection with generic prints. He had his fleet of luxury cars hidden away in a private garage, leaving a single, slightly older Toyota Camry in the building's car park. A car head had detailed to remove any trace of his driver. The penthouse was now a beautiful, hollowed-out shell, a movie set designed to look like the home of a man who had recently lost his fortune. 2 days after the fall, he called her. He made sure his voice carried the right note of exhaustion and shame, layering it over his very real anxiety. Amara? Is Keen. A pause, a shaky breath. I'm so sorry to ask this. I don't have the right. But the nanny agency, they require payment up front, and He let the sentence hang, a masterpiece of manufactured helplessness. He heard her soft intake of breath on the other end of the line. Where are you staying now? She asked, her voice practical, already shifting into problem-solving mode. He gave her the address in Surulere. I finish my last lecture at 2, she said without a moment's hesitation. I can be there by 3. Please don't worry about paying me. Just focus on whatever you need to do to get back on your feet. The generosity was another knife twist. Amara, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, she interrupted gently. I offered. See you at 3. At 2:55 p.m., Keen stood at the window of the bland Surulere apartment, his heart hammering. He watched a yellow Danfo bus rumble to a stop at the corner, its sides rattling. Amara stepped out, looking incongruously elegant amidst the bustling, everyday street scene. She wore simple jeans and a law school sweatshirt, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She checked the address on her phone, then looked up at the building, a determined set to her jaw. He met her at the door, the picture of strained gratitude. Thank you for coming. I don't know how to thank you. She waved him off, stepping inside. Her eyes took in the apartment, the beige walls, the functional IKEA-like furniture, the absence of any personal touch. It was the home of a man who had just moved in with nothing. She nodded, seemingly satisfied it was adequate. Then the triplets, who had been napping, began to stir. The performance was over. The real work began. And Amara was a force of nature. She didn't just watch the children. She immersed herself. She found the small, poorly stocked kitchen and somehow conjured a healthy, simple meal from the basic groceries Keen had guiltily purchased. She got down on the floor with them, building block towers only to laugh uproariously when Chitty gleefully knocked them down. She bathed them, her sleeves rolled up, singing Yoruba lullabies as she gently soaped their little backs. Keen watched from the doorway, his soul aching. This was no longer a test. This was a revelation. He saw the woman she truly was, capable, resilient, and overflowing with a love that asked for nothing in return. She filled the sterile, fake apartment with a warmth that his real penthouse had lacked for over a year. Her laughter was real. Her patience was real. Her gentle scolding when Chimamanda tried to eat a crayon was real. He was the only fake thing in the room. As she prepared to leave that first evening, her hair slightly messy, a smear of baby food on her sweatshirt, she turned to him. They're wonderful, Keen. You're doing a good job. The words, meant to comfort, felt like a condemnation. He was not doing a good job. He was lying to the best person he had met since his wife died. He simply nodded, unable to speak around the lump of shame in his throat. As the door closed behind her, he leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. The apartment was silent again, but now the silence was different. It was filled with the echoing memory of her genuine goodness, and it made his deceit feel infinitely more despicable. He had wanted to see the truth of her heart, and she had shown it to him, freely and fully. And all he had given her in return was a carefully constructed lie. The charade settled into a devastatingly beautiful routine. Every day, like clockwork, Amara would arrive at the Surulere apartment just after 3. Her presence became the sun around which their new, fictional world revolved. Keen, the master architect of this deception, found himself its most tortured prisoner. He began to manufacture excuses to be home during those hours. Working remotely, he'd tell her, his laptop open to complex financial spreadsheets that were now just props in his play. But he couldn't focus. He was too busy watching her, his heart unraveling with every passing moment. He saw the way Shed patiently teach Chitty how to stack cups, her encouragement a soft, steady melody. ODD, you did it. Shed cheer, and Cheetah's face would split into a grin of pure triumph. Ken's own praise felt hollow in comparison. He watched her with Kayamika, the most sensitive of the three. When a sudden loud noise from the street would make her jump, Amara wouldn't just shush her. She'd scoop her up, press her close, and whisper into her hair, "It's okay. Omo me. It's just the world being loud. I've got you." And Kayamika would bury her face in Amara's neck, her tiny body relaxing instantly. It was a level of intuitive comfort Keen, for all his love, struggled to provide. He saw her resolve with Chimamanda, the little escape artist. Instead of just strapping her tighter into her chair, Amara created a safe exploration zone with pillows and blankets, giving the toddler the freedom to satisfy her curiosity without danger. She needs to discover, Amara explained to Keen, as if he were a student. Her spirit is too big for a cage. The wisdom in her words shamed him. He was the one building cages of lies. In the evenings, after the children were fed, bathed, and read to, a new ritual began. Amara would pull her law textbooks from her backpack and spread them out on the dining table. The focused intensity on her face was a different kind of beauty. She'd chew on the end of her pencil, her brow furrowed in concentration, muttering Latin legal terms under her breath. Keen would bring her a cup of tea. "How's the studying?" He'd ask, leaning against the doorway. She'd look up, her eyes bright with intellectual fervor. "This case is infuriating. The precedent is archaic, but the judge is clinging to it like a life raft. If I could just..." And she'd launch into a passionate dissection of the legal principles, her hands painting pictures in the air. He loved those moments most of all. He loved her mind, the fire of her ambition, the sheer force of her will to carve out a future for herself. She was a queen in a law school sweatshirt, and he was the fool pretending his throne was made of plywood. The guilt became a physical constant, a cold stone in his gut. It was there when he woke up. It was there as he watched her pure, unvarnished love for his children. And it was there at night, screaming in the silence of his empty bedroom. He was stealing from her. He was taking her precious time, her emotional energy, her genuine compassion, and repaying her with a fiction. One night, Kayamika developed a fever. She was fussy, her skin hot to the touch. Ken's old panic began to resurface. But Amara was calm. She sent him to the pharmacy for infant paracetamol while she prepared a lukewarm bath. He watched from the bathroom door as she cradled his whimpering daughter in the water, singing the same Yoruba lullaby his own mother had sung to him. Ajo Aro, Omo Tio Gilor. The rain is not falling, the rain is not falling, only the child awake at night. Her voice was a balm. Kayamika's cries softened, her eyelids growing heavy. In that moment, bathed in the soft yellow light of the bathroom, Amara wasn't a law student or a waitress. She was a mother, their mother. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just falling in love with her. He was watching her seamlessly become the missing piece of their family. She was healing a wound in his children he hadn't even fully acknowledged. And he was lying to her. As she gently dried Kayamika and tucked her back into bed, humming softly, Keen knew he could no longer continue. The test was over. She had passed every single iteration with flying colors. Her character was not just gold. It was a diamond, pure, resilient, and infinitely precious. His deception was no longer a means of protection. It was a poison, tainting the most beautiful thing to happen to him since the birth of his children. He had to tell her the truth. The thought of her hurt, her anger, her potential rejection was terrifying. But the thought of living one more day in this beautiful, fraudulent life was unbearable. He had to come clean. He had to hope that the real man, the flawed, fearful, but genuinely captivated man, was someone she could still learn to love. The unraveling of his heart was complete. All that was left was the truth. The air in the apartment was still and warm, thick with the lingering scent of baby powder and the vegetable stew Amara had cooked for dinner. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic breathing of the triplets, finally asleep after their bath. The familiar, peaceful end to another day of their shared fiction. Amara was packing her textbooks into her worn backpack, a faint smile on her face. "I think Chitty is going to be an engineer," she mused softly. "The way he figures out those stacking rings is pure logic." Keen stood by the sofa, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his knuckles white. This was it. The silence felt like a held breath, and he was about to shatter it. "Amara," he began, his voice rough, unfamiliar even to his own ears, cracked on the second syllable. She looked up, her smile fading instantly at the tone. She straightened, her dark eyes searching his face, seeing the tension there. "Keen? What's wrong? Is it about the job hunt?" Her concern was immediate, genuine. It was the final, twisting knife. He shook his head, unable to hold her gaze. He looked instead at the floor, at the faint scuff marks from tiny shoes. "We need to talk. Please sit." A flicker of confusion, then unease, crossed her features. She slowly lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair, placing her backpack on the floor beside her. She waited, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight. He didn't sit. He couldn't. He paced a few steps, then turned to face her, forcing himself to meet her eyes. The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. "Nothing I have told you for the past month is true." The sentence fell into the quiet room like a stone. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the takeover. Losing everything. This apartment." He gestured around the room, his movement sharp, jerky. "It's all a lie. A test." He saw the confusion deepen, not yet understanding the magnitude. "A test for what?" "For you." The words burst out of him, charged with his own self-loathing. I was afraid. After my wife, after Zara died, everyone wanted something. My money, my influence. I saw how you were with the children, how kind you were, and I felt something for you I hadn't felt in so long. And it terrified me." He started to talk faster, the confession pouring out in a torrent, desperate for her to understand the twisted logic that had brought them here. "I needed to know. I needed to be sure that what you felt was for me, for us, and not for all of this." This time, his gesture was vague, meant to encompass everything he was. He told her about the penthouse that was still his, the fleet of cars, the global empire of Obi Technologies. He laid his entire kingdom at her feet, not as an offering, but as evidence of his crime. He watched her face, waiting for the dawning comprehension, for the anger, for the hurt. Came slowly. The confusion in her eyes didn't clear. It crystallized into something harder, colder. The color drained from her face. She listened utterly still, as he laid bare his vast wealth and his profound poverty of character. When he finally finished, his breath coming in ragged pulls, the silence that followed was absolute. It was a void, sucking all the warmth and light from the room. Amara slowly stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her movements were deliberate, almost robotic. She picked up her backpack and slung it over one shoulder. The tears, when they came, were silent. They welled in her eyes but didn't fall, just shimmered there, reflecting the lamplight and a profound, bottomless hurt. "You tested me?" The question was a whisper, so quiet he had to lean forward to hear it. It was laced with a disbelief so raw it was more powerful than any scream. "You thought my heart had a price tag, and you needed to see if it was on sale?" She took a step back, towards the door, creating a physical chasm between them. Keen, the man I was falling for, was the one who looked at his children like they hung the moon. The one who was kind and humble and trying his best. That man was real. Her voice gained a shred of strength, edged with a devastating sharpness. "This," she gestured around the modest apartment, her lips twisting in a bitter smile. "This was a set, a stage, and I was your unwitting actress. You didn't trust me. You orchestrated my every line, my every move, just to see if I'd play the part to your satisfaction." She looked at him then, and the tears finally spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. But her gaze wasn't soft. It was shattered. The children are asleep. They'll see myself out. She turned and walked to the door. He stood frozen, paralyzed by the wreckage he had caused. He wanted to fall to his knees, to beg, to explain, but his tongue was leaden. She opened the door, paused for a fraction of a second, and then stepped through it, closing it behind her with a soft, final click. The sound echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. Keen remained standing there, alone in the center of the room he had created for his lie, surrounded by the ghosts of her goodness and the crushing weight of what he had just destroyed. The truth was unveiled, and it had left him with nothing but ashes. The silence after the door clicked shut was a physical presence. It was heavier and more profound than any silence Keen had ever known. It was the sound of a heart breaking, of trust shattering, of a future that had, moments ago, felt so brilliantly possible being extinguished. He didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, staring at the blank white of the door, replaying the look on her face, the shattered trust, the silent tears, the devastating clarity in her eyes. The words, "You didn't trust me," echoed in the hollowed-out chambers of his heart, a verdict he had written for himself. He finally sank onto the sofa, the same sofa where she had read to the children just hours before. He buried his face in his hands, and a dry, wrenching sob tore from his throat. There were no tears, just a convulsion of pure, unadulterated regret. He had been so afraid of being fooled that he had become the fool. He had been so terrified of a gold digger that he had failed to recognize a treasure, and in his clumsy, fearful hands, he had dropped it. The next morning, the emptiness of the apartment was a fresh agony. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. There was no smell of her shea butter and ambition, no sound of her humming as she prepared breakfast. The triplets felt it too. They were fussier, more clingy. Amara kept looking towards the door around mid-morning, her lower lip trembling as if expecting a presence that never came. Chitty, usually independent, refused to be put down. Their routines, so carefully and lovingly established by Amara, were gone, and the structure of their little world felt flimsy without her. Keen tried to replicate it. He made the same oatmeal, but it was lumpy and bland. He sang the same Yoruba lullaby, but his voice was flat and carried none of her soothing magic. He was going through the motions, a ghost in the shell of the life he had destroyed. He returned to his real penthouse, the one overlooking the lagoon. He had thought it would be a relief to be back in his world of curated luxury. It wasn't. The vast, open space felt sterile and cold. The art on the walls was just expensive decoration. The breathtaking view was just a picture. It was all just things. The things Amara had told him didn't matter. He had everything and he had nothing. He'd catch a whiff of a similar perfume on someone in the elevator and his heart would lurch. He'd see a law student with a backpack on the street and his breath would catch. His entire existence had become a series of painful reminders of her absence. His work suffered. In meetings, his mind would wander, replaying that final conversation. Tund would have to gently bring him back to the agenda. His drive, the relentless ambition that had built Obi Technologies, had evaporated. What was the point of another million, another acquisition, another headline, if he had to come home to this echoing silence? The worst moments were at night. After the children were finally asleep, the quiet would press in on him, and his mind would conjure images of her. Her smile, the intelligent light in her eyes as she debated a point of law, the way she'd tuck a stray curl behind her ear, the feel of her hand when it had briefly brushed against his while handing him a cup of tea. He had not just lost a woman he was falling in love with. He had lost the person who made him feel like a complete father. He had lost the one who made his house feel like a home. He had lost the future he hadn't even realized he was desperately hoping for. He was a billionaire who lived in a palace, surrounded by every material comfort imaginable, and he had never felt more impoverished. The nest was empty, not of children, but of the warmth, love, and music that one remarkable woman had brought into it, and he had no one to blame but himself. A week passed, 7 days of a hollow, aching silence that nothing in Ken's power could fill. Flowers were pointless. Jewels were an insult. A simple apology was a pebble thrown into the ocean of hurt he had created. He had to speak her language. He had to show her he understood the magnitude of his failure, not by appealing to her heart for himself, but by honoring the very essence of who she was. He put his vast resources to work, not for profit but for penance. Tund, ever discreet, was given a new set of tasks, far removed from mergers and acquisitions. Find out everything about her moot court competition. The venue, the time, the judges. Keen instructed, his voice stripped of its usual CEO authority, replaced by a raw, determined urgency. And I need a specialized, secure pod seat for the triplets. Something that lets them be there without causing a disruption. Next, he called his legal team. I want to establish a full, endowed scholarship at Unilag. The Amara Okoro Scholarship for female law students from Abeokuta. Full tuition, living stipend, everything. Make it happen yesterday. He didn't want her name attached to his money. He wanted her name to be the source of opportunity for others like her. Finally, he met with his financial advisors. I want to create a foundation, the Amara Obi Foundation for Child Advocacy. Using her name and his linking them felt like a prayer, not a presumption. Initial endowment, 1 billion naira. It will be entirely independent. She will be the sole director. She will have complete autonomy over its mission and funds. It was the opposite of his test. The test had been about taking everything away to see if she stayed. This was about giving everything he had with no expectation of return, to show her he saw her, he believed in her, and he trusted her implicitly. The day of the moot court competition arrived. The university hall was filled with the nervous energy of aspiring lawyers and the solemn presence of esteemed judges. Amara stood backstage, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had thrown herself into her preparation, using the focus to wall off the pain. She was determined to win, to prove her worth on her own terms, in her own world. Taking a steadying breath, she walked onto the stage. Her eyes scanned the audience, adjusting to the lights. And then her step faltered. In the front row, directly in her line of sight, was Keen. And next to him, in a cleverly designed, clear-sided pod, were Chitty, Kayamika, and Chimamanda. They were clean, quiet, and curiously looking around, each holding a soft toy. Ken's gaze was not demanding or pleading. It was filled with a pure, unwavering pride and support. He was there, not to interrupt, but to witness. Not as a billionaire, but as a man honoring her passion. The sight was so utterly unexpected, so profoundly moving in its absurdity, that it cut through her anger. For a moment, she just stared, her mind unable to process it. Then the competitor in her took over. She blinked, squared her shoulders, and began. Her argument was flawless. She was incisive, passionate, and eloquent. She argued not for a grade, but for every underprivileged child she had ever dreamed of helping. She channeled all her pain, her intelligence, and her fire into her performance. And she won, resoundingly. As the applause washed over her, she felt numb. She accepted the trophy, smiled for pictures, but her eyes kept drifting back to the front row. Keen was clapping, his eyes shimmering. The triplets, sensing the excitement, were bouncing in their pod, clapping their tiny hands. When the crowd thinned, he approached her, holding Chimamanda in his arms. The children reached for her, babbling happily, "Auntie Amma, Auntie Amma." He didn't offer excuses. He didn't ask for forgiveness. "I was a fool," he said, his voice low and fervent. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I am not here to ask for it for me." He gestured around the hall. "I am here to support you, unconditionally." He told her about the scholarship, named for her and her hometown, designed to lift up other young women with her dreams and her grit. Then he told her about the foundation, the billion naira endowment, her complete directorship. "Your heart is for others," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You taught me that. Let me help you fund it. This isn't from me to you. It's for you to do with as you see fit. No strings, no expectations." Amara looked at him, at the raw sincerity in his eyes, at the grand, selfless nature of a gesture that had nothing to do with winning her back and everything to do with believing in her. He wasn't offering to make her a queen in his castle. He was providing the tools for her to build her own kingdom. She looked at the children who loved her. She looked at the man who had orchestrated this immense, humble apology. The anger and hurt were still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But around it, something else began to thaw. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps, the first fragile seed of a second chance. He was finally speaking a language she could respect. The foundation was a titanic gesture, a seismic event meant to reshape the landscape of his wrongs. But Amara knew that grand gestures, like skyscrapers, were built on foundations of daily, mundane moments. She had accepted the directorship of the foundation with a fierce, protective ownership. It was a tool for good, and she would wield it with integrity, regardless of the man who provided it. But Keen himself? He remained a question mark. She agreed to see him, but on one condition. They started over. From zero. No assumptions, no history, no billionaires, no waitresses. Just Keen and Amara. Their first real date was not at Zuma or any of his usual haunts. He picked her up from her small student apartment in Yaba, and they took a Danfo bus to the National Museum in Anakin. He looked uncomfortable, his large frame folded into the cramped seat, but he didn't complain. He paid their fare with a crisp bill that made the conductor sigh and rummage for change, and Amara hid a smile. At the museum, they wandered through the cool, quiet halls. He wasn't a man who lectured or showed off his knowledge. Instead, he asked her questions. What did she think of this Benin bronze? How did that sculpture make her feel? They debated colonialism and cultural preservation, their voices hushed but intense. She saw his mind at work not as a CEO but as a curious, thoughtful man. He was listening to her, truly listening, and it was more intoxicating than any fine dining. Another date was a simple walk through the Lekki Arts and Crafts Market. He didn't pull out a wallet full of cash to buy everything she glanced at. Instead, he haggled good-naturedly with a vendor over the price of a beautifully carved wooden bowl. "My friend, you unwound me with that price?" he said, slipping into Pidgin with an ease that surprised her. He ended up buying it, but only after a satisfying back and forth that left both him and the vendor laughing. He handed it to her. "For your keys," he said simply. He took her and the triplets to the beach. Not a private resort, but the public beach at Elagushi. They spread a blanket on the sand, and Keen, in a simple t-shirt and shorts, spent the afternoon building a lopsided sandcastle with Chitty, while Amara helped Kayamika and Chimamanda paddle at the water's edge. He got sand in his hair, his expensive sunglasses perched on top of his head. He was just a dad. A gorgeous, utterly focused dad who laughed when a wave knocked over their castle, sweeping Chitty into a fit of giggles. Slowly, carefully, he began to introduce her to his world, not as an exhibit, but as a reality. He took her to a quiet, elegant dinner at his home, the real penthouse this time. He didn't apologize for its opulence or try to hide it. He simply shared it with her, showing her the view he loved, the books he read, the music he listened to. He talked about Zara, his voice soft with a love that was now a peaceful memory, not a painful wound. He spoke of his fears of failing as a father, his insecurities that had nothing to do with money. Amara saw the weight he carried, the immense responsibility of his empire, the constant scrutiny, the loneliness at the top. She saw that his test, however misguided, had sprung from a place of profound vulnerability, not arrogance. They talked for hours. They unraveled their pasts. She told him about growing up in Abeokuta, the pressure of being the eldest, the sacrifices her parents made. He told her about his humble beginnings in a small flat in Surulere, coding through the night, the dizzying rise of Obitech. The trust wasn't rebuilt in a day. It was built brick by brick through these moments of honesty and vulnerability. The anger thawed, not all at once, but in slow drips, replaced by a cautious, deepening understanding. She was falling in love not with a billionaire, but with the man she had first met in that restaurant. The brave, overwhelmed, kind-hearted father. She was just finally getting to meet the whole, complicated, truthful version of him. He was courting her, not with wealth, but with his authentic self. And Amara, her own heart cautiously unclenching, found that she vastly preferred this man to the fictional one she had first fallen for. This was real, and it was infinitely more valuable. A year to the day after their first, chaotic meeting at Zuma, Keen asked the maitre d' for a specific favor. The man, who had watched the entire extraordinary saga unfold from his podium, simply smiled and nodded. "It will be taken care of, Mr. Obi." That evening, when Amara arrived, the restaurant was transformed. The usual hum of conversation was gone. The lights were dimmed, and every table was empty save for one. Their table, the epicenter of their story. A single pillar candle flickered at its center, casting a warm, intimate glow. Rose petals were scattered along the aisle between the tables, leading to where he stood, waiting for her. He wasn't in a rumpled suit or a casual shirt. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored navy suit, a picture of quiet, confident elegance. He was just Keen, her breath caught in her throat. She walked towards him, the silence profound, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The memories of this place washed over her. The chaos, the kindness, the lie, the truth, the long, beautiful road to this moment. He didn't speak as she approached. He simply took her hands in his thumbs stroking her knuckles. His eyes, dark and serious, held hers. A year ago, he began, his voice low and steady, filled with the emotion that made her heart stutter. "A very brave woman walked into a hurricane of my own making. You saw past the mess. You saw a father who loved his children, and you offered him a lifeline without a single thought for yourself." He swallowed, his gaze never leaving hers. "I was a fool. I was so afraid of the gift I was being given that I tried to test its worth, not understanding that its value was in its freely given nature. You loved me when you thought I had nothing. You showed me that my greatest treasures were not my assets, but my children. You taught me that trust isn't something you test, but something you build, brick by brick, with honesty and patience." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket. He didn't get down on one knee. He simply held up a ring. It was not a gaudy, oversized diamond, but a stunning, elegant piece. A central diamond surrounded by intricate filigree that echoed traditional Nigerian patterns. It was unique, personal, and perfect. "You built a life with me out of the rubble of my mistakes," he whispered, his voice now thick with a love so raw it brought tears to her eyes. "You became Mama to Chidi, Kayamika, and Chimamanda. You are my partner, my equal, the smartest and kindest person I have ever known." He finally lowered himself to one knee, looking up at her, his entire soul laid bare in his expression. "Amara Okoro, will you let me spend the rest of my life striving to be worthy of you? Build a life with me. Be my wife." Tears of pure, unadulterated joy streamed down Amara's face. The last vestiges of the old hurt dissolved, washed away by the torrent of his sincere, hard-won love. She saw the man, flawed, fearful, but profoundly good, who had fought his own demons to become the man she deserved. She didn't hesitate. She nodded, her voice a choked, happy whisper. Yes. Then, stronger, filled with all the love and certainty in her heart. "Yes, Kenechukwu Obi. 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling slightly. Fit perfectly. As he stood and pulled her into his arms, the restaurant's staff, who had been watching discreetly from the kitchen, broke into quiet, happy applause. But Keen and Amara didn't hear them. They were lost in their embrace, in the quiet, triumphant joy of a love that had been tested, broken, and forged anew, stronger and more beautiful than ever. The wedding was not an event. It was a legend woven into the very fabric of Lagos high society. But its legend had little to do with the astronomical cost and everything to do with the palpable, radiant joy that infused every moment. It was a magnificent fusion of Igbo and Yoruba traditions, a vibrant, colorful declaration of their union. The ceremony itself was held in a flower-filled garden overlooking the lagoon. Keen, resplendent in a rich Isiagu tunic over white trousers, stood waiting, his heart pounding not with nerves, but with a pure, uncontainable anticipation. His best man, Tund, stood beside him, offering a rare, broad smile. Then the music shifted. The processional began, but it was not the bride who appeared first. Down the petal-strewn aisle came three tiny figures, the undisputed stars of the show. 2-year-old Kayamika and Chimamanda, in miniature versions of Amara's lace Iro and Buba, clutched tiny baskets of petals, scattering them with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Behind them, Chitty, looking solemn and proud in a tiny Isiagu, carried the pillow bearing the rings, his little brow furrowed in concentration under the weight of his important duty. The congregation erupted in a collective tearful "ah," their hearts melting at the sight. And then she appeared. Amara was a vision. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of modern and traditional design. A fitted, off-the-shoulder lace bodice that flowed into a grand, elegant train. Her geli was tied into a magnificent crown, and the same intricate filigree pattern from her engagement ring was echoed in her gold jewelry. But it was her smile, radiant and brimming with tears of happiness, that truly stole the breath from everyone present, most of all Ken's. As she walked towards him on the arm of her beaming father, she wasn't just a beautiful bride. She was a queen, a lawyer, a mother, and his future. Ken's own tears flowed freely, unashamedly. He saw not just the woman before him, but the journey, the chaotic restaurant, the painful lies, the quiet moments of rebuilding, the profound love that had weathered it all. The reception was a feast of music, laughter, and love. During their first dance, as Ken held Amara close, swaying to a soft blend of highlife and a contemporary love song, he whispered in her ear, "Do you remember that first day, the jollof rice in the hair?" She threw her head back and laughed, the sound like music. "How could I forget? I thought you were about to cry." He admitted, smiling. "I was utterly lost. And then you appeared, my symphony of chaos." She looked around at their celebrating families, at the triplets being danced around by their grandparents, at the glittering lights reflecting on the lagoon. "And now?" she asked, her eyes shining. He pulled her closer, his voice a soft murmur against her ear. "Now, my love, we have composed a new symphony, and it's more beautiful than I ever could have imagined." They weren't a billionaire and a waitress. They were Keen and Amara. He was her anchor and she was his compass. Together, they were a complete family, a partnership built on a foundation of hard-won trust and a love that had been tested and proven true. As the night wore on, Amara took a moment to step aside, watching her new husband laugh with his friends, her children sleeping contentedly in a nearby specially designed pod. She looked down at the ring on her finger, not as a symbol of his wealth, but as a token of their journey. He had tested her for gold and had found a priceless diamond. And in the end, she had helped him discover that his own greatest wealth had never been in his bank accounts, but in his capacity to love, to learn, and to become a better man. The music swelled, a joyful, triumphant rhythm that filled the night air. It was the sound of a new beginning, a symphony of a love that had finally, blessedly, come home.